Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and get started. One of our speakers is stuck in traffic, but he's the third speaker, so it should work out fine. My name is Phyllis VACo. I'm staff with the Virginia Association of Counties, and I wanted to thank you all for being here at our conference, and particularly for attending this session on opportunities in the emerging economy. I love the word opportunities because it has so many different meanings and connotations, and I think that the emerging economy is the same. There are some real pluses and there are some challenges as well. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about our three speakers today. To my left is Frank Shafrock, and Frank is the director of the Center for State and Local Leadership at George Mason University, where he's also an assistant professor. He's also an adjunct professor in the Graduate School of Public Policy at George Washington University. He served as the director of federal policy and intergovernmental relations for the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board. And he was also chief of staff for U.S. Representative James Moran. He was director of policy and federal relations for both the National Governors Association and the National League of Cities, and was assistant counsel for the U.S. Senate Banking Committee. He's a regular columnist for state tax notes, and he is currently heading a project for the MacArthur Foundation on the topic of severe municipal fiscal stress. I'm going to get some water before I read the next one, because I've been talking an awful lot the last few days.
That's unusual.
Thank you so much, Sterling.
He said it with a straight face.
Yeah, I know. That is Sterling Reeves, who is the president of my fan club. Okay. The second speaker today is Raymond Warren, and Ray is a deputy and legal advisor for the Arlington Commissioner of Revenue. As legal counsel, he advises the Commissioner of Revenue, writes final determination, submits filings in tax commissioner appeals, handles court cases, and interfaces with attorneys and taxpayers. He's a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Wilmington and the UNC Chapel Hill School of Law. He practiced law for more than 25 years in his native North Carolina, and has also served 2 terms in the state legislature and 7 years as a Superior Court judge. He joined the Arlington Commissioner's Office in 2008, and he is a member of the Local Government Attorneys Association of Virginia, and is active in the Virginia Commissioners of Revenue Association. And our third speaker, who will be sitting in that empty chair soon, I hope, is Senator William Stanley, and he was elected to the Virginia Senate in 2011, and he represents the 20th Senate District, which includes all of Patrick and Henry counties, parts of Carroll, Franklin, Halifax, and Pennsylvania County, part of the city of Danville, and all of Martinsville and Galax. Senator Stanley chairs the Committee on Local Government. He serves on the committees on Agriculture, Conservation and National Resources, Commerce and Labor, Courts of Justice, and Rules. He also serves on a number of statewide bodies, including the Virginia Housing Commission, the Manufacturing Development Commission, and the Virginia Commission on Coal and Energy. Senator Stanley is a graduate of Hampton-Sydney College and the District of Columbia School of Law. And again, he's going to come racing in that door any minute now. But we'll go ahead and start with Frank Shafrock.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. In August of 2014, on a typical day in Virginia, if there's such a thing, there were 157,146 Uber rides. 66,000 Lyft rides, and 375,000 people were Airbnb homes. Now, interestingly, at about that same time, I teach a class every year of senior employees in counties and cities, for the most part in Northern Virginia. And every year I'm a taskmaster and they do a project. So for instance, last year we did Driving the Nation's Future, about the implications of self-driving cars for cities and counties. Is the state going to regulate them? Is the local government going to regulate them? What are the revenue implications? The year before we did one on the sharing economy, looking at Uber and Airbnb and the potential state-local conflicts, what the revenue implications are. But before we started that class, remember these are all senior employees of counties and cities in Virginia, I said, this is happening very fast. Before you write a single word, you need to meet with one of your elected officials. You need to find out what they understand about the sharing economy, so when you write something that is constructive and helpful rather than gobbledygook. So next week when we met, I said, so how did it go? So one student said, well, I met with one of my elected leaders and I started talking about Airbnb, and the official said, well, there are no Airbnb facilities in this county. And what did you do? She said, well, I looked at my iPhone underneath the table and I saw that there were 171,002 Airbnb facilities. I said, so what did you do? I mean, this is the chairman of your county. What did you do? She said, well, excuse me, but there are 171,000 Airbnbs in this county. And I have a map so I can show you where each and every one is. I said, well, how did the supervisor react? The supervisor said, well, what does that mean? And she did a good job. She said, well, here's what it means. It means that you're going to start hearing from hotels and motels and the lodging industry and the Chamber of Commerce, how come they're all paying taxes? How come they're all required to have extra forms of security? They need different forms of insurance to ensure that if something happens, they're not liable. But if the Airbnb facilities have none of those things. What happens if a family calls, they're getting ready for that wonderful 3-hour commute to Washington, D.C. from, say, Prince William County, and they find out an Airbnb guest at the neighboring house has parked the car in front of the driveway. Or a dog has bitten an Airbnb customer. So the sense began to come through, oh, this is sort of throwing a problem. I've been calling around the country to try and find out how different local governments are dealing with the issue. It took me 12 calls in Fargo, North Dakota to find someone who would at least speak to me. I said, what do you do about revenues from Airbnb? He said, well, we don't have any Airbnbs. I said, well, I can show you a map of Fargo, and there are 1,200 Airbnbs in Fargo, North Dakota. Do you collect any revenue? I mean, do they pay taxes like every motel and hotel does in Fargo? He said, well, can we? So part of what's happening, right, is the world is changing, and it's changing very fast in front of us, and so understanding how you're fair and how you balance between traditional providers of lodging or taxis or limousines, how you deal with protection it's just a brand new world. It means complications. Now, I know in Virginia, because of the way states and local governments, right, Senator, get along so well together, there will be no area of potential conflict here with regard to sales taxes, sales and use taxes, income taxes, insurance, regulations, and whether these regulations will be governed at the local level or the state level, and registration. That's the good news. I think it's going to get much better very soon. So I want to finish by talking about a couple of things that are happening. Airbnb today only has 1.5 million listings in 34,000 cities and counties around the world. It's projecting annual revenues of $10 billion by the year 2020. So it's not just a problem in this country, but in countries around the world. It is raising a special issue that I know is a lot of concern to places like Arlington and others. What are the implications for affordable housing? Because it's changing the cost of housing if people can provide rooms for visitors. In New York, 55% of the 51,000 or so Airbnb listings in New York City are considered commercial properties. So one of an issue you have to deal with in a Virginia county right away, okay, if someone is operating an Airbnb, is that a commercial property or is that a residential property? And again, then you got to go back, what are the zoning implications, what are the land use implications, what are the property tax implications, and what are the regulatory implications? How do you balance? So I said, I think that's the easy part. The hard part, and I feel very guilty making a bad, hard day for you, except for, counselors. There's a brand new report, less than a month old, from Morgan Stanley. The report is titled Autonomous Vehicles and Municipal Bonds, by which we also mean county bonds, of course, opines that the impact on local budgets could be in excess of, get your adding machines out, $500 billion. Now that's going to be $500 billion that works both ways. There are going to be incredible revenue opportunities for counties, and there are going to be incredible risks. So one of them, self-driving cars, is going to mean the elimination of about 40% of all the parking spaces, especially in urban areas. So the Mark Schwartz called. He said, well, what am I going to do with all that extra space? I said, well, I know in Arlington,
Parks.
the voters.
Parks.
Yes, that's what it is. It's parks. The single #1 priority for Arlington County residents is more parks. Well, if you can eliminate parking garages and parking spaces on the street, boom, you've got some room to do some parks or do other sorts of commercial development. So I think there are going to be great opportunities. But it does mean you're going to get for the police departments far less in parking ticket revenue, far less in speeding revenue, etc. The transportation sector, which today in the United States is the second highest average household expenditure, is going to change radically. It's just behind housing at 14%. So you can see that reflected in all of your budgets. The average household will reduce its car ownership, which today is 2.1 vehicles, unless you have teenagers, and then it's of course bigger, to 1.2. So just think, over the next 5 years, we're probably going to see the number of automobiles driven on highways cut in half. I think in the senator's old days, when we used to have knockdown, drag-out battles with Fairfax County about adding a new lane on I-66, probably remembers those. It's no longer going to be an issue. A self-driving car, you can fit 3 self-driving cars in 2 existing lanes. So the concept that I'm reading today of people talking about building new interstates and adding lanes to interstates is going to become irrelevant within 4 years. So there are parts of your respective capital budgets that are going to take a lot of rethinking. That will create savings and long-term benefits and opportunities for the future. That's why I think this is a great, great chance. But I think you all want to sit and work carefully with your planning departments, your transportation departments, and obviously your money grubbers, your revenue departments, to think through where are these changes going to be, where are the great opportunities going to be, where are the risks. The report opines that on state and local general obligation bonds would be the most significant, in large part because it would radically alter commuting pressures and the requisite impact on assessed property values. Think of this. Around bigger cities, the closer you get to the urban core where most of the jobs are, the property tax, the assessed property values are the highest, and they get lower as you get farther out because of all the people that commute. And so the closer you are, the smaller your commute, the higher your assessed property values. The farther away you are, the lower they are. That suddenly changes. When the concept, I know I go into my office at about 5 in the morning, and the traffic from Stafford, etc., is already in a high volume to beat the traffic. I can't leave my house in Alexandria after 6 without being caught in a traffic jam on I-95. That's all going to change in ways we've never anticipated before. And that's all going to have effects on assessed property values. Obviously, that will affect school budgets, something just a few of you might or might not be concerned with. So there are big changes coming your way. Finally, the last part I want to talk about is, as I said, we've done a series of publications. This one is on self-driving cars, just for city and county officials. The one we did last year was on the sharing economy appropriately, and obviously I can make copies available. The one we're doing this year is, with the exception of those of you in this room, everyone else in America is growing older. And they're not just growing older, they're living longer than any generation of Americans ever has. My neighbor, my former neighbor, who was the head of the largest nonprofit organization in the United States to help the elderly, says that in Virginia, if you've run out of money and you're old, you're far better being in a Virginia penitentiary than in a Medicaid. So a big issue. All of you are going to be confronted because of your health care responsibilities is an aging population where the money's going to run out before those people die. Where are they going to live? And they're going to end up being on your desk. They're going to be your problem to consider how to deal with it. So I didn't want to leave you on a low note. But the fact that you all might be there one day will make it acute in your mind to think there are ways here for innovation and opportunity. And if you think, here's Smith Barney, $500 billion in changes. And the most directly affected levels of government are going to be counties and cities. So I think you're at the dawn of an incredible time, a great opportunity. It'll be challenging, but I think you all are going to be at the heart of changing the future in Virginia. So I want to wish you good luck, offer any resources we can, and thank you for your time.
Okay, a couple things with this. One is, this is not my computer, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to operate this or not. Secondly, I'm talking about taxes. And of all these things, I think the tax implications are probably not as great as land use and the public safety and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to try to make it interesting, but I think those aspects are a little more serious. I'm almost 60. I'm scared of riding around Northern Virginia with driverless cars. I don't know about you. But then on the other hand, I'm thinking, then I won't have to deal with Maryland drivers anymore. There's always an upside. All right, so who in here does not levy a VACo tax? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about VACo today, but we're also going to talk about transient occupancy, and hopefully everybody does one or the other. So, trying to see how we make this work.
There you go.
So when people talk about the gig economy or the new economy, I think the point of this slide was basically, what bothers me sometimes is everybody talks about it as if it's all the same. It's one thing. It's not. There's different pieces of it. And this is sort of a house party maybe held at an Airbnb house in your premier residential neighborhood. And the point is just that the way the legislature dealt with and the way we deal with, say, Uber or Lyft or driving vehicles is one thing. The way we deal with something like Airbnb is potentially another one. And we can't get caught in this idea, well, they're all part of the gig economy. They are, but they have different impacts. Basically, an Uber driver driving down the road is doing the same thing as an individual who's not an Uber driver. They're driving down the road. When you change a single-family house from a single-family house to a place where people are checking in and out every day, maybe you are changing, maybe not. Hey, not my problem with policy and not my place to tell you what to do, but my point is that even when we talk about the gig economy, you have to take each piece of it and say, okay, with this, what do we do, and not try to see it all as one thing. So what about from the tax point of view, Uber, Lyft, and the car sharing company? Frankly, in Arlington, we haven't had any real assessment issues on this, either with the car itself or with getting the drivers to sign up for VACo accounts. Now, you're not going to get a lot of money for VACo from people driving for Uber, because generally, if they unless you're a small jurisdiction, if they gross less than $100,000, you can't charge them more than $50 a year anyway. So if they are grossing more than $100,000, I want to know what they're doing, because it's sort of starting to compete with my salary there. But generally, it's not going to be a big VACo issue. And frankly, in Arlington, the state legislation, senators, helped a lot because we can now identify these cars. And the TNC, if they sign up to be part of a network, the state sends us a list of those, and we're able to go to these people and say, you need a business license account. One thing I do think is important is when the state legislature decided from a statewide perspective we would regulate these vehicles, they did not take away the local control of assessing and collecting the taxes. And that works really well. So you can adapt to the gig economy without giving up the traditional way that you assess and collect taxes. And the Uber experience sort of illustrates that. It works very well for us to continue to do all the taxation at the local level, even though we now have a statewide uniform way of dealing with the industry. Okay, so the Airbnbs, on the other hand, they have been a great difficulty. And I am one who believes that however the legislature chooses to tackle this, or if they choose to send it back to localities as supervisors, you have to tackle this. I think the gentleman here was absolutely right. You have these, we have 1,200 in Arlington. We have 7 signed up for VACo accounts. And the reason is we don't know where they are. An Airbnb doesn't put out a sign. If you've ever been on the site, it's very opaque. They don't say at 322 Main Street, this is what you can get. We depend on self-reporting. The problem we have is our zoning department, correctly interpreting our current zoning in the county, says it's illegal. Unless you can fit in under the bed and breakfast category, which is a very narrow category, it's illegal. So we are basically back in the 1920s. There are speakeasies in Arlington, and we're trying to get them to pay tax on the liquor. And that's what it amounts to. So I do think at some point it is necessary to address the fact that they are here. I personally don't think you can regulate them out of existence. So then we say, how do we regulate them in the best possible way? As with Uber, however, I will say that Airbnb will not be a big VACo generator. Again, unless you get the $100,000 threshold, you're not going to be paying very significant VACo taxes. However, everybody should pay the $30 or $50 license fee, and also by being licensed, we know some information about them, we collect information, and we know that they are complying, at least with the tax law. My point is, it's not a very big VACo generator. However, if you have a transient occupancy tax, it can be quite extensive. Remember, I said we had 1,200. And we don't know we have 1,200, we haven't gone around and done a census, but there are companies who will sell you the information about where they're located, and they tell us there are 1,200 in Arlington, and we believe them. There are no floors to TOT. The first dollar you collect, you're supposed to apply the TOT. It's not like 100,000 and below. So you're going to get that revenue. The nice part about it is people here in Bath County will tell you, the transient occupancy tax is usually paid by people who don't live in your county, which is a really wonderful thing. So that makes it a very good source of revenue. Now, one point, and I'm going to address this in another slide in a minute, a lot of you have transient, and I want to emphasize this, a lot of you have transient occupancy tax ordinances that date back 20, 30 years. And they might say something like, a transient rental is in a place that rents to 4 or more persons. I don't know where the 4 or more came from, but this is in a lot of ordinances. Now, being a local government attorney, I'll tell you what happens if one jurisdiction did this back when you started adopting transient occupancy taxes. We tend to copy off of each other. My main point is that's not necessary. Now, think about if you're doing the Airbnb situation, and it says in order for you to have to collect TOT, you have to rent to 4 or more persons at one time. You're going to eliminate a lot of your Airbnb tax base just by an ordinance that says something that is not necessary and not required by state law. So we'll revisit that in a second. The reason this is important is if the bill is passed like that was enacted last year, if the state legislature says we're going to centralize collection of the TOT through the Department of Taxation, they are still going to collect what you have enacted. And if your local ordinance says, well, if you're only renting 2 or 3, you don't have to pay TOT, that's what they're going to get. And moreover, under the state legislation, there's almost no auditing powers. So if Airbnb interprets that, or the owners of these properties interpret that and say we're exempt, it's going to be really hard for you to challenge that. I'm just saying that to encourage you to talk to your county attorneys and check and see if the ordinance is up to date and, with this 4 or more situation. And just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, here's the current Arlington County ordinance. In Arlington, the way they dealt with it is, even though the state enabling law allows you to tax transients from different kinds of establishments, we just call everything a hotel and we put it all under there. But you can see we have the 4 or more. And if you don't have that, we don't have any basis to tax you. And we've asked our county board to change that, and I am confident and feel hopeful that come sometime next year they will be willing to do that. But that's an example of the kind of language that you may or may not have in your statute. You may get some homeowners question to you, like people who are doing Airbnb, do you even have a right to collect the transient occupancy tax from me? And the answer is, surely you do. The enabling statute for towns and cities says you can just do transient room rentals, doesn't say where. The one for counties, the one that we're more concerned at the bottom, you can see it's very broad. Anybody who stays not only at a hotel, but a motel, boarding house, travel campgrounds, other facilities offering guest rooms. So basically, yes, I think this is the state enabling law that gives you the right to levy the TOT. Yes, if anybody questions you, the Airbnb type rentals should be covered if your ordinance is properly drawn.
Ray?
Yes.
Excuse me, can you just go back to that last slide a second?
Yes, sir.
The orange language where it says rented out for, quote, continuous occupancy. So the question is, a lot of Airbnb hosts, as we understand it, they'll do it for a special occasion, the holidays, the inauguration, some other, sporadic occasion. So, I mean, I think, how would people necessarily interpret, kind of that sporadic and occasional versus the language continuous? In other words, it's not going to always be on the market.
Well, that's not exactly what this language is designed to say. What this language says is to draw the line between 30 days and greater than 30 days.
Right.
So if you are renting for anything less than 30 days, it's a transient rental. If it's more than 30 days, it's just a rental.
Okay.
Which is great, and thank you, Commissioner Bystad, because that adds into my next slide. We have had some people come up and say, well, can you levy a VACo tax? Because the state VACo law says, unless you're a grandfathered in county, and there are 47 cities, towns, and counties that are, but if you're not, you cannot levy a VACo tax on just the rental of property, the long-term rental of property. But what I want to point out, that's not applicable to this. If it's a transient rental, it's not part of this prohibition. So again, you should be able to levy the transient occupancy tax. Now the next slide I have up, remember I'm a commissioner of revenue, I'm a deputy commissioner of revenue, and the association requires me, on pain of death, while I'm in front of supervisors and legislators, to say this: please keep the assessment and collection of taxes local. We feel like we're best equipped to handle audits and to assess properly. We do this all the time with other businesses in our jurisdictions. We actually have the manpower. The Department of Taxation is overwhelmed with their sales tax responsibilities. And as we noted, the Uber and Lyft legislation did not change who collects and who assesses the taxes, and we found that that works very well. So that's my plug for the local commissioners of revenue. On the VACo, we do have a couple other big issues that weren't part of the two I've already mentioned. And one of the things I wanted to point out here is the VACo law was last really worked on in 1996, and it's creaking. It's creaking under all these changes. And what happens is local governments are afraid to talk about VACo for good reasons, because they don't know what the legislature will do with it. Business is afraid to cooperate with us because they don't know what we might do to them. And I'm going to close out here with a plea that we try to work around that we try to establish some trusted ways to deal with it. So a couple examples. Under VACo law, the most important thing is, where's your definite place of business? Well, let's say you have a company of 5 young individuals who are developing phone apps, and they rent these little by-the-hour offices every now and then, and they live in 5 different houses. Where is their definite place of business? This is an example of how technology is changing, but the law was written in 1996 when we had another presidential election, as you can see. And it hasn't changed since then. When you have multiple companies, you're supposed to allocate the gross receipts based on payroll. That was back when everybody was an employee or not an employee. A lot of these companies, you have 4 or 5 partners, but they don't have a formal partnership. Or you have layers and layers of subcontractors. And we are going to need to address this kind of thing in the VACo law. So what we have now is, since the VACo law was adopted, Facebook, Uber, office sharing. I don't know if you know what your county is, office sharing. We have these places now where you basically can just take a cup of coffee, go out, hang out, and do your work and leave. You might be there 1 hour one day, you might be there all day. If you need a conference room, you have a certain right to that. That's your office, but it's more like a coffee shop, a nice coffee shop, but it's a shared office. This has all arisen since 1996. 2 other areas, I don't want to say too much because there might be attorneys in here who go against the Commissioner's revenue, but the law speaks to things like publishing. Now, the Washington Post is a publication. We would all agree with that. The Richmond Times-Dispatch is a publication. What about an online newsletter? The reason that's important is because publishers are exempt from VACo. And we are facing questions now like, are you a newsletter? Are you a publication? The law that was enacted in 1996 does not address this. Same thing for broadcasters. We know, you know your TV stations, you know your radio stations. Now Netflix, all of these things are, there are various ways to broadcast over the internet. And my prediction is in the next 10 years, that'll be maybe more important than what goes over the airwaves. Again, broadcasters are exempt from VACo. We're trying to draw lines in the Commissioner of Revenue offices. We're trying to draw lines, say, no, you're not. You're not a publisher because you're only online, or you're not a broadcaster because this, depends on a certain network, but we're just doing that in a blind. We don't have any help. So, close out and let the senator here. As an assessor, not as a politician, just as an assessor, I would love it if we could get together as something, and I've talked to Phyllis about this, so she knows I'm saying the same old thing. If we could get together a group of assessors and local officials like you, and the business community, in a safe place, 2 years, 3 years before we even want to talk to the legislators and say, what are your issues? How can we address these? How can we work on these? Because what happens in Virginia is every year is an election year. And everybody says, we can't do this, it's an election year. Well, every year is an election year. And because there's so much concern and lack of talking maybe on this issue, I would say let's talk about maybe the 2019 session. If we could just get together a group of assessors, local officials like you, and the business community, because we want business to succeed as well, and say, okay, we have issues like publishing, we have issues like Uber, how can we tweak the law, and how can we talk privately now for the next 2 years? Maybe in 2019 we can do something about it. Thanks.
Before you sit down,
Yes, sir.
if I could, forgive me, I'm relying on just my memory, but it's my understanding that the legislature passed a moratorium on any local enactments or ordinances that interfere with Airbnbs, and it was in one of our legislative books.
It went into a study. No.
Yeah, and I can explain it.
Yeah, right, that's actually, Senator Stanley's going to address that issue.
We changed our ordinance for short-term rentals, but we haven't on the VACo and business license route because we thought we were restricted from that.
So,
Thank you.
on that note, let's have Senator Stanley talk about the work he's been doing.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for letting me be here today. My name is Senator Bill Stanley. I'm from Southside, Virginia. My district stretches from Gale Axe to Halifax. And everything in between. I have a little bit of North Carolina in my district. So that's I am the majority whip of the Senate Republican Caucus. I have the honor and privilege of serving with Senator Favola, my good friend there, who also have the privilege of having on local government committee, which I am the chairman of the Senate Local Government Committee. I'm also taking the lead for my caucus on the shared economy issues because we believe, quite frankly, that something must be done. For every year that nothing is done, then that, like an ink stain on your shirt, grows, and pretty soon it's hard to contain or control. I start only by saying, last on the TNC bills, I had an Uber Lyft bill, and it really came down to an issue of local regulation, and of that in terms of tax collection. That was one of the pieces of my bill that got through, keeping it local, but also regulatory effects. And those regulatory effects usually come in the form of, if we think about it this way, and I am not a fan of the driverless car. I like to drive. I am a control freak. I don't ever see it happening down in my area. We like NASCAR. And if nobody's driving, there's nobody to root for. I mean, I don't think anybody be wearing one of those T-shirts that says "Driverless number 22." Not Earnhardt. So I have a little hope that America and their love for their cars and being behind the wheel will continue. But when it came to Uber and Lyft, what we had, and especially in our area, where we don't have the big metropolises and the density of population, and I speak to you having been someone who was a son of a naval officer, so I lived in Virginia Beach, but I lived when there was nothing there. And I lived in Northern Virginia. We moved there in 1978 when the #1 industry in Northern Virginia was dairy. And I watched it grow. And when it got too big for me, I absconded from the jurisdiction down south, back to my homeland. We don't have, but what we have is what you have in terms of commercial transportation and cab drivers. Most of those are family-owned businesses that have been there a long time. And one of the big things that they had was a liability and an assurance that they were actually making a promise to those that they had transported that they would be secure. One, in checking out the driver, in getting the driver licensed, background checked, and making sure that they were not going to be putting someone behind the wheel who was going to put our local citizens in danger. Plus they have, as a trial lawyer, $6 million worth of liability coverage, and also coverage and insurance for not only the person that's riding in the back, but also for the driver. What Uber and Lyft do, in the same way that you draw it into Airbnb, is they come in, they say, you're way behind the times, we have this platform, you touch a button, here's an industry, not only can you get a ride, but we're making jobs. So you need to just let us do what we're going to do, don't worry about a thing. And my dad used to lovingly say to me, when I want your opinion, I will give it to you. That's what they're doing in the legislature, and that's what Uber and Lyft tried to do, and they hire very expensive lobbyists, and they come at you like a house of fire. And you guys, not just us, but you guys, seem to have, you know, the tread marks over top of our heads as they just speed right by. It was a heck of a fight to even allow them to have liability insurance for the driver, or to require the driver to have liability insurance. Because whatever it is, it's the margins, they get a fee. I can tell you right now, even with our requirement, and it wasn't much, $150,000 in liability, that's not a lot. That's what you carry on your car. And I'm going to tell you, the personal policies are not going to cover either. So in liability, someone in the back with a driver that's not been looked at, the background checks that they claim are ridiculous. They are not up to date. They are not continuously updated or checked to make sure that driver is not going to hurt somebody either by driving or by a physical act. And we have seen that as Uber has gone on, people harming others while driving for Uber. But the liability to the other person, the third party that's not even in that car, is an issue, and they failed to address it, and they continue to say no big deal. And the insurance policy that they claim, in the same way of Airbnb, this $1 million insurance policy, there's about 19 layers, I counted, to even get to it. So there are 18 ways for Uber and the insurance company to say you're not getting to it when somebody is injured. The problem, too, is some of the legislators, Barbara Favola excluded, have been there a long time. And they're slow moving. I think I make the joke sometimes that when you think about modern law, and then you think about Virginia law, you take modern law and crank back the clock about 30 years, and that's where we are. Some of our senators and House of Delegate members that shall remain nameless are not as equipped to keep up with the ever-changing world of technology, and therefore the economy that comes out of it. Hence the Airbnb issue. And believe me, it is my opinion that we, while keeping the local elements in, did not do all we could have done for the Uber and Lyft, the TNC, the Transportation Network bill. And therefore, we need actually eyes and ears on the ground, especially in those localities that have it. Franklin County, I checked this morning, we have one Uber driver. One. I'm sure he or she is not very busy. Not compared to, say, Arlington or Alexandria, Virginia Beach. We have, though, a similarity because we live in Franklin County, we have Smith Mountain Lakes, so the Airbnb is quite an issue. In Franklin County, we have a prohibition, except for those that were grandfathered before the regulation, at the local level from local transient occupancy. No short-term rentals at Smith Mountain Lake on the Franklin County side. On the Bedford County side, they allow transient occupancies. And so a lot of your renters from out of town are over there in Bedford. There are a few houses, including my lake house, which is exempted because it was built before the regulation was put in. But quite frankly, this is going to be an issue. I've drafted an Airbnb bill. And let me say that I come with my bias from factually looking at this as much as I can as a lawyer and a legislator, that just because you create an app, and just because a company that puts all of its profits and all of its corporate income in offshore in Ireland, therefore avoiding any real taxing issues, says because you press this button, you are now a hotel, I don't believe is the proper way to go, and especially flies in the face of many things. Because I have a 60-acre farm. So if I get a platform and an app, I can be a pavilion and have, Megadeth come and play a concert. Why not? I have the space for parking. Why not? I have the acreage. It's a little bowl right there. It'd be perfect. Why not? Well, here's why. Because of you. Because of regulation through what we know as zoning laws, you can prevent your neighbors, your citizens, from living next to the Marriott Hotel unless they want to live next to the Marriott Hotel. That is simply why I am against taking this out of your hands. My bill says it's a local option. If you want it, you can have it, and then you can regulate it and you can tax it. If you don't want it, you cannot have it,
Yes.
and you keep your way the way your citizenry wants it to be. Why? Because there is a real purpose in zoning laws. And I stand as a Republican who's not a big fan of the Dillon rule. I just want to tell you. I think you should have more tools. Thought I would have gotten more applause for that. I believe.
We love you.
Love you too, Bab. Bab Fab, my nickname for her. She's fantastic as a legislator too. She really knows how to shake it up and get things done. And I was honored to be a co-patron on her first bill that was ever passed in the Senate and the House. In fact, when both of us stood up in the House, just to give you an indication of the partisanship, we stood next to each other, and the House Republicans looked at one another, and they're in a vast majority, and they said, one of those is wrong. So let's talk, basically what we're up against, which is a real struggle that's coming on. And I think if we don't do anything, and I talked to the the Airbnb lobbyists, if we don't do anything, then they win. No law for them is better than any law.
That's true.
I sit on the Housing Commission where we've been doing a study. It has been controlled by those in the Airbnb community to where those people that serve in local government like you, those citizens who come up and say, I have this guy next door, he's renting it out to a bunch of college kids down in Virginia Beach, they're ruining my lawn, they're keeping our families up at night, and they go, tough. So what we have to do is not rely on the Housing Commission, I'm afraid to say, to come out with any great piece of legislation, because I think ultimately what they're doing is they've got the pillow in their hands and they're hoping a slow suffocation helps them get away. Why? Because by way of example, let me just give you one. In Richmond, the city of Richmond, we got anybody from the city of Richmond here? You do not allow short-term rentals, correct?
That's correct.
If you go to Airbnb's portal, their platform, you're going to see the city of Richmond. You touch on the city of Richmond, there's something like 800, 900, right? 800 or 900 short-term rentals in a locality that says you can't have them. Sitting on the Housing Commission, I have been the thorn in this whole thing. And let me tell you, I said to them, she said, we were talking about liability. And she said, well, look, if it makes you feel any better, I'll get you the policy, which they've never sent me. And I said, you know what made me feel better? By obeying Richmond's laws and not flouting your laws. They're committing illegal acts and they're saying you catch up with us, not we respect you. If that's the baseline, that's how they're doing it. And they're taking it from Uber and Lyft, which is high elbows and strong moves. Then you haven't got a chance. But I firmly believe you do have a chance. But I believe you need to get together with us senators and House members and make a strong play for simple regulation which says if we want it, if our citizenry wants it, we'll control it. We'll regulate it. And we'll regulate it under the existing laws of Virginia. If we don't want it, it shouldn't be forced down our throat because some dude has a phone with an app and wants to turn his house into the Holiday Inn. Because then regulation means nothing. Zoning means nothing. And so that's where I think our biggest challenges are, because if Airbnb can come in and say, your ag zoning is meaningless to me, your residential zoning is meaningless to me, then who's the next in the sharing economy who's going to say another regulation or another exertion of local power is meaningless to them, and you must catch up and you must submit. Name one company that does that other than Dominion. Name one. It's just a joke. Name one company that gets that kind of way just coming in from nowhere. I mean, think about the structure. Everything is out in the Jersey Isles and England and Ireland. So there's no way to catch them. There's no way to get them. The question I had for their representative, who got kind of short and curt with me, was this. So they said, well, we're telling them to collect the rent, to collect the tax. So when they collect the rent, they should build in the tax in their price. So let's say, for by way of example, I had to rent a $100 room in their condo. Let's say he throws 10% tax. Then the charge to the end user is $110. Well, Airbnb collects tax. Airbnb takes a percentage of that tax. It took me 3 minutes to get her to admit that's exactly right. That their baseline is not on the 100, it's on the 110. So now you've got a company which believes it can take a royalty from a tax that most rightly goes to the locality. If you do not stop them now, then they will run over you and others will be behind them. Let's even talk about the current real estate law. Those that may have short-term rentals in your counties, you understand that anyone who offers short-term rentals, like, we have the lake rental company, they're regulated, right, under state law. In fact, they have to be licensed realtors. Does Airbnb have to be a licensed realtor? There's a very good reason why we have that statute, why you have to be a licensed realtor if you're marketing property. Because it's for the consumer as well as for the homeowner. And that those in the real estate field are sensitive to those needs in their locality. That law will basically be meaningless and gone. Nobody's been thinking about it. I, unfortunately, am losing sleep thinking over this stuff. So, we have to have you be advocates like no other. There is naturally a tension between local government and state government. I apologize for that. I don't think that Barbara and myself think in that way. I promise you, because I've gotten my majority leader to agree that all Airbnb will be coming through my committee instead of general laws like it did last year. But this is also, it's not just regulation, it's not just zoning, but it's the tax scrutiny that bothers me the most. And I'll just try to wrap that up, because I can talk for 20 more minutes. Local governments have to be wary of orchestrated tax deals. So what they do is they do the voluntary collection agreements. That's the one thing that I just talked to you. You're asked, one, you got to track down the Airbnb home. Two, you got to get them to want he or she to comply with your code. And then three, you have to have them collect the proper amount of tax. And then four, remit the proper amount of tax. Can you imagine what that's going to be if it's not already on some of them in terms of chasing down that cat? It's going to be one of the hardest things. There's a lack of transparency associated with Airbnb and the voluntary collection agreements. You don't know who they're collecting them from. You don't know if they took a royalty off of it. You don't know how long they stayed. You don't know if they're collecting the right amount. You're just going to get a check and that's going to be the way it is. I believe that any collection of tax must be contained at the local. I don't think the state is equipped, just as the prior speaker said, to handle a clearinghouse for Airbnb and then dole out, okay, this is for Franklin, this is for Fairfax, that will just be a mess. But you have to have, and my bill provides access and review of all relevant records associated with Airbnb, its users, and also the people that are offering their property in your area for sale. They're even asking for specialized treatment in cities where they're operating. They want different reporting requirements. No other business has this. And certainly, if we're going to do it for Airbnb, why for our hotel industry that employs a lot of people that we collect a lot of taxes from and do it right above board, why aren't they given the same special treatment? If you're going to allow this to happen, I think ultimately, and the legislation will provide, then it's got to be just like a hotel in terms of regulation, revenue collection, etc. You think about a hotel and an Airbnb. I mean, you don't know who you're renting from in Airbnbs. We've seen where criminal acts, people have been videotaping their renters. We see criminal acts. We have assurances through the hotel, and the same way we had assurances through the taxi driver that the safety measures were going to be, that the regulatory structure that you or the state had put in place was going to be acknowledged, adhered to, and that the revenue stream and collection of those revenues for the locality would continue in a flawless manner as much as possible. So, I'm telling you, Airbnb will not help you to collect that tax. It's never going to change. In fact, They bristle when they talk about tax issues. So it's regulation, zoning, proper tax collection, proper tax assessment, collection, and remittance. Those are your issues. And ladies and gentlemen, I come to you, and I know we sound like such a happy panel up here today. I mean, you're the happiest one. You're just don't mess with the beephole.
Which is a good message.
Yeah, but it made me think too, that maybe we don't have to wait till 2019 in terms of that. Because when these issues come up, they come up really quick and they pass. There has to, I believe, be, and I believe that my caucus will be in majority support of a regulatory scheme of Airbnb that will say it's the local option. That's why I think Thomas put me in charge of that. In fact, I'm making my presentation next week. Yes, sir.
Are they opening up themselves to any sort of conspiracy charges, tax evasion? When they're aware of local ordinances that don't allow things and they conveniently are opaque, and the whole way they operate. I mean, some of our most clever criminals in history, we've got them because they put a stamp on an envelope and put it in the mail. But we couldn't get them any other way. Isn't this conspiracy to a certain degree?
Yeah.
Tax evasion?
Yeah. Well, they're actually helping, in San Francisco, by way of example, they are actually helping the Airbnb hoteliers, for lack of another term, to evade tax collection and not be cooperative, and even not divulging, of course, like we're talking, one of the main things is data. How do you know where these places are? Which home has it? You know, my bill has it, you gotta put an Airbnb sign out in front of your house so your neighbors know. I mean, it's also for your neighbors. I don't like it. But I figure I might give away that twig to get some other stuff. But why not? Why don't I have a right to know, especially for my children, my neighbors, that next door is a hotel? And every weekend when I see 6 cars parked in the grass in the front yard, that at least I'm aware of what's going on. I think, notice to your, remember, most of your citizenry is not renting out their house.
Yeah.
So you're not, the big elephant in the room is the fact that they are not going to be helpful with you unless you put the tightest restrictions and controls on them. And if we don't do it this year, Senator Favola, we're never getting it done. So when we talk about, and certainly BPOL is something we can talk about, but I think we can work that in and making sure that as a part of that regulation that we're going to do it right, because I'm telling you, no bill is a win for them. No bill allows them to grow. No bill allows them to continue to act illegally and tax-free in the great city of Richmond. And once that ink spot's too big, we'll never get it back. That horse will be out of the barns. And that's something that I think, so I'm asking all of you to be total advocates. Vigilance is the eternal price of liberty, according to Thomas Jefferson. He meant Airbnb.
What is the number of your bill? What's the bill number?
I haven't filed it yet. I have it under cover so they wouldn't know I'm coming. So I'm tweaking it. So it hadn't been filed. It's going to be filed on December 2nd, the last day we can file, pre-file. Or I will file it as a part of my 8 package, not pre-filed. I'm taking this very personally, unfortunately. And I don't think y'all should be treated this way either. Ma'am, you had your hand up first.
My legislators have said to me, I guess one of the things that the Airbnb lobbyists are saying to them is, well, this, it's a property right. I have the right to do what I want with my property. And that seems to resonate with a lot of them. My response has always been, the next door neighbor has a property right too. But that doesn't seem to resonate with some folks. How would you suggest we respond to that?
Okay, that's a great question. Look, and then that's part of the argument. That's how Uber and Lyft. It's these are jobs. Okay, so it's jobs. It's a growing economy. It's giving people income. We had a senator who lost his race and is now making quite a amount, $3,000 or $4,000 a month on it. Good for him. He took me around one time and he never shut up. It was like, I didn't need the radio. But so if you're ever in Richmond, Steve Martin's great. So those are jobs. This is, it's my property. Well, pardon my language for all the ladies in here. Okay, then I'm having a strip club. I'm doing a strip club. What would the Republican who's all about property rights say about that? Put it in the most, if it's my property, then I should be able to do everything and anything I want. So therefore zoning is ridiculous, unnecessary, and old and out of business. Overlay districts, ridiculous. Business, everything should be B1. Is that? So when you start saying it's a complete deconstruction of what is already working and in place, and if you start approaching this, it is your property, okay? But when the bank has a problem, you know, do you think most mortgagors are going to allow, if they knew that they're leasing it out?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I have a second property. I pay a lot different rate. I pay a tax in South Carolina that's a lot different because it's a beach house. And I rent it out. That's different.
Yep.
So I think if you approach it really, so you're saying I could do anything with my property whatsoever? A brothel, strip club? You go to the conservatives with that stuff, okay? They'll clutch their cross and go, oh, God, no. So,
We'll try that.
this gentleman over here has it. Yes, sir.
Senator, two quick questions. Number one, if you assume that a bill will emerge from the General Assembly, what is the outlook for grandfathering among jurisdictions who already have some protocol in place? And number two, what are you hearing from the governor's office as to their attitude on the legislation?
Great questions. Great questions. First, I think, quite frankly, the local option, at least in my bill, will be, you know, here's two ways. It's either you can never have Airbnb, it's three ways. You'll never have Airbnb, we reject Airbnb in its entirety in Virginia. That's really not going to happen. Second is, the Christmas bill is going to force Airbnb down every locality's throat and set the regulatory tone and make it more of a state machination. Mine says, it's your problem. I believe in you. You have the ability to do this and regulate it right and even impose penalties if they're not doing it right or wrong. You have a right in the protection of your citizenry to say no. So, I think it's going to be one of the most important pieces of legislation debated in our 45-day session. I can tell you this. From the people I've talked to in His Excellency Governor McAuliffe's office, they're kind of in the back of it. We'll just see how this is going to unfold. I haven't gotten a commitment one way or the other. Barbara, do you know? They've just said, we're going to see what happens.
I can hear, waiting.
They
Yeah,
thought it was cool
and I think
last
that's, you know, look, and I think you can get your legislator, your senator, your House of Delegate member with good advocacy, good common sense advocacy. I'm getting all these resolutions from my counties. Sometimes they have an effect, sometimes it goes just whatever, you know. And you know, with your legislative agenda, I read them all, I put them all in order. Some of our House and Senate members don't pay any attention to them. But what they do pay attention to, and this is where you come in, it's not just you knocking on our door, we see you for 5-10 minutes and then you're gone. But you awakening your citizens, of which you have direct contact with, those supervisors, to flood our email boxes and our phones. I am known, Barbara Folola will back this up, as the puppy and kitty senator.
Oh.
Because I pass bills, I submit bills about puppies and kitties and protection of companion animals. I love them. I will have senators and House of Delegate members come into my office and go, look, I'll vote for your bill. Just get them to stop. And I'll say, what are you talking about? I've gotten 2,000 emails from these people that say, I hate cats. Tell them I don't hate cats. That kind of advocacy. And you'll be amazed. Your legislative assistants, like right there, my Chief of Staff, Richard Krause, will come in with a piece of paper and go, we got 600 emails in support of this bill. One of them says if you don't vote for it, they're going to shoot your porch light out. So because remember, that's the people that vote for us. That's the people that stopped in Kroger and go, you four-flushing so-and-so, you did this wrong. That moves the needle from some of my other colleagues more than anything else. So you are actually at the switch to get the most responses since puppies and kitties. You know, the Humane Society, they're great. Get the Humane Society behind your bill, we'll take care of that. So there was another question.
Yeah. Basically, isn't the responsibility for payment
of the transient occupancy tax, isn't that the responsibility of the homeowner itself?
Yes. Yeah, it's not Airbnb.
So if we can localize these people, identify them, I mean, obviously it's a little hard to do it, but when you look at the picture on Airbnb, you can begin to, especially if you broadcast it and ask people to identify these homes, or tell us about somebody renting next door to you, we can then stick the Commissioner of Revenue on.
Well, what a bunch of, we're turning our citizenry into local private investigators, Magnum PIs.
I get it because I get the complaints about the noise next door. I said, okay, here's your chance to do something.
But see, here's what they do. They complain that when they've got college kids out in their front yard drinking beer till 2 in the morning. It's an Airbnb. They tell you, what do? We're going to go in there and tax them. I mean, your citizen is not exactly happy you didn't solve the problem. And here, and the scheme is this. So I have the platform. I put my house up. I get some guy who looks at it and wants to rent it. He hits the app. Airbnb does the collection, and then they remit minus their fee. So at that point, there's tax money in that homeowner's hands or not. The guy could have, who's renting it out could say, I'm not charging taxes. Or if I am, I'm not charging the going rate. Or if I am, I'm keeping that because I need it this week. And it creates a whole host of problems for you guys that I don't think even a vigilant force of neighbors solves for you. Sir?
As an administrator, we see both sides of this in talking about your partnership between localities and the state. If something like this passes, which I understand and would support, is that we need the local tools to be able to address it, because we've had an issue in Pulaski County with this. We don't currently regulate it. But one of the reasons is we pretty much, you knock on the door, think about how exactly would you go about the regulation? How does it work in practice? And best I can figure, you're knocking on the door saying, who's related to who here? So how do you, the worst thing would be a regulation that you can't enforce.
Yeah.
Because then you just frustrate the public, because they see the party out on the street and they want you to do something about it. And you can't, unless you've got some strong tools there, it's hard to do anything.
Well, and I can promise you, we've really been working this bill just on my kitchen table. It is even right down to where the localities can make requirements of liability insurance upon that person, or that notice must be given to neighbors, or that notice must be given to the mortgagor. Some may say that those kind of regulations are trying to frustrate the process, and if that's it, well, so be it. Otherwise, I think as many tools as you can have in the toolbox of this issue is needed. The other thing that Senator Favola and I can tell you is you can have 15 points in a bill, and by the time it comes out of the buzzsaw known as the House, there's about 3 left. What you try to do is overpack a bill, and then that's a giveaway. But I'm going to keep those things. When that bill comes out, and you're going to see some other bills too. I think you'll see not just my bill, but some others that are going to be offered. Then that vigilance is the eternal price of liberty quote comes in, because you need to be picking over that bill. Do not be afraid and think that I am going of such an ego that I know everything. I don't. The one thing you can tell me is this doesn't work, this works. How about this? And those are emails which are just important to me, and to try so that when we're molding this piece of clay, when it's ready to go in the oven, it's going to be what you want. It's not going to frustrate your purposes. And it's also going to make sure that your citizens that you serve are comforted, at least to the degree that they can be, that you're going to be protecting them, which is your #1 job. Sir? Please.
I just want to add one additional note here, that it would be to your benefit to also talk to both your former governors who are currently in the U.S. Senate. And I say that because Airbnb has sued the city and county of San Francisco to block the city's ordinance in San Francisco, which imposes fines on unregistered apartment rentals. So that's a suit filed not in the state of California, but in federal courts. The ordinance in San Francisco holds short-term rental companies like Airbnb accountable for any apartment or home listing which has not been registered with the city. Airbnb is seeking an injunction to prevent San Francisco from removing listings and from fining Airbnb for each unregistered listing. So all these really excellent suggestions from the senator, you need to make sure both both U.S. senators representing Virginia are aware of, this is not just going to be a state preemption potential, but it's potentially a federal issue.
San Francisco has probably one of the strongest general bills about illegal hotels. And it started from the speakeasy and the brothels and those kind of things in San Francisco. So they're basing it on some what they've asserted is an antiquated law. San Francisco has gone right after them, and good for them, and we should support them. That is one to watch, but at the same time, I think we can forge our own way, and he is exactly right, to make sure that the federal is also protecting us as the state level is. And don't think, look, you may have a majority in my caucus, but the House Republican caucus may be in the other direction. Chris Peace is he's in leadership over there, and he's just hot and bothered for this thing. I just can't understand. Sir?
One quick, in your bill, there are provisions in there for not just a straight rental from Airbnb. When they do a house swap, let's say from another country, that people come from one country to come here to take
Like
a house.
trading
And those people go to
timeshare?
go to that country and take the house that the person left.
I don't think you've addressed that, but again, great stuff. That's again, hey, you know, I try to think of these scenarios. We'll take a look at it. I get that, sir.
Yes, that's that question. So in your bill, is there going to be a provision where the locality has turned down the short-term rental because it's in a gated subdivision, or perhaps where the houses are so close together, there's like a minimum setback requirement? Because that's the instances we require conditional use permit, and the ones we've turned down about 4 or 5 because of that gated community where they're so close together on a small lot.
And I think Richmond is struggling with this as well, but my bill basically says if your HOA says you can't do it, you can't do it. There are HOAs that have regulatory restrictions on short-term rentals that say it can't happen. Well, I've only said there is only one entity in the Commonwealth of Virginia that is more powerful than the DMV, and that's HOA. So you got to keep them like they are.
The issue is the Scott v. Walker case said if you don't specifically have it in your restricted covenants that short-term rentals are prohibited, that's not good enough. Just saying businesses aren't allowed, that's not good enough. You have to say short-term rentals. And that was the case from Smith Mountain Lake.
Yes.
So that's the issue. These HOAs can't, because of the rules, you know, can't change their bylaws or covenants because of the voting requirements.
That's interesting. Well,
So
and
that's,
how do you get around that? I mean, now look, if the locality prohibits it, then that's a blanket. But if the locality allows it with regulation, certainly the prohibitions of the HOA, the HOA is not specific enough.
You say it's got to be in the covenants, not the regulations?
yes.
So it's covenant. It's got to be run with the land. Because remember, those covenants tell you what you can and cannot do. And that's another one for those that were asking that question. Well, if that's the case, then any covenants from an HOA are meaningless too. It's my property. Well, I can't put my couch on the front porch of my house. That's wrong. But I live with it. Yeah, I live in Franklin County. What do you want? My car's up on Chalk. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, speakers. Please fill out your evaluations, and I'm going to commit to you all that I'm going to be spending some time with Senator Stanley in the very near future to talk about all of these concerns.
District 20 is my email, virginia.gov, so please feel free to fill it out. Just say not puppy and kitty. Airbnb.